I'm Jacob Kruger, and this is the Write Your Screenplay podcast. On this podcast, rather than criticizing movies and TV shows 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down, we talk about what we can learn from them as screenwriters. Today, we're going to be talking about Jesse Eisenberg's film, A Real Pain, which premiered at Sundance and is currently showing to really rave reviews. We're going to be using this film not only to talk about indie filmmaking and writing strong character-driven movies that are explorations of theme, but also to talk about how to introduce your main characters. This film does such an extraordinary job in the way that it introduces the main characters of David and Benji, David played by Jesse Eisenberg, Benji played by Kieran Culkin. And that introduction serves not only to frame the film, but to help us track the character's journey through the rest of the storytelling, despite us not having the traditional Hollywood structure. So we're going to be talking a lot about that and much more. But first, I wanted to talk to you about my upcoming class. It's live online, meaning you can ask questions, you can get a personalized response. It's taught by me, and this is a class where we get deep into structure. We learn how to build structure intuitively and organically. We get introduced to 7-act structure. The class also includes a one-on-one consultation with one of our faculty members where you will get direct attention and discussion of your own writing with an industry mentor who can really change the trajectory of your career. So check it out. You can find all of that on our website, writeyourscreenplay.com, as well as information about all of our other wonderful programs, including our ProTrack mentorship program for screenwriters. So let's talk about A Real Pain, and let's talk about how to introduce your characters in a screenplay. I am not going to spoil anything in A Real Pain that matters for the first 3/4 of this podcast. And when we get to the end, I am going to give away some spoilers so that you can fully understand everything that gets built in this movie. But I will warn you before I do so. The way that we introduce our characters, I'm going to steal a concept from Francis Ford Coppola, one of the masters of introducing characters, and he would call our initial introductions to characters vignettes. What a vignette is an image, a scene, a sequence, or a line of dialogue from the character at the very beginning that goes, this is who I am. Me at the core level, this is how you get me. Now, that doesn't mean that this is all the character is. As we're going to see in A Real Pain, we meet Benji and we think we know who he is, and it turns out he is so much more than that. And we meet David and we think we know who he is, and it turns out he is so much more than that. But understanding where your character is starting is actually the most important thing in your script, because it is the window through which we're going to understand everything else that happens to them. To give you an example of this, think about a job interview. If you show up for a job interview, and the first thing you do as you're coming in, you trip and you spill your coffee all over the CEO's beautiful white shirt, you're always going to be seen as the guy who spilled the coffee on the CEO. If you end up getting the job because you're so brilliant, they're going to say afterwards, man, when that guy came in and spilled the coffee, I thought, no way, but holy crap, there's something about him. 20 years from now, when you're taking over as CEO of the company, you're going to tell the story. You never believe what happened during his interview, right? That is going to be the window through which they understand you. And by the way, if you don't get the job, they're going to be like, what about Mr. Coffee? Yeah, forget it, right? They're going to understand you whether you got the job or didn't get the job, no matter what happens, no matter how competent, incompetent, brilliant, clumsy, coordinated. It may be that you end up, you end up becoming like a master gymnast, right? But we're going to understand that journey in relation to that clumsy coffee spill that started your journey, right? It's the window for everything. And that is valuable on 3 different levels for you. The first is on the writer So often I see new screenwriters rushing through their first image. They're so excited to get to their plot, right? Especially if they've spent a lot of time outlining, which we teach outlining a little bit differently at the studio, but especially if they've been taught traditional ways of outlining, right? They want to rush into their plot to start things happening. And then they're surprised when the audience doesn't really get how it matters, or when they feel disconnected, or when suddenly they feel blocked and they can't figure out how to actually navigate their way through their plan. Well, often it's because they didn't start with a powerful first image. They don't really know where the character's beginning, and so they can't feel the journey. Whereas if the character starts out with a really strong first image or series of images or first line that goes, "This is them," then every time we write them after that, it becomes so easy. If you've taken my Write Your Screenplay class, you understand the concept of mirrors and foils, right? On the simplest level, we're going to mirror and foil from there. In other words, if that's the first impression, the next time we meet them, are they doing something similar or strongly contrasting? And the next time we meet them, are they doing something similar that outdoes in some way, that outdoes what we've seen before, or something strongly contrasting, right? And in this way, we, the writer, start to tell ourselves a story of the character. If you get really good at doing this, you don't even need an outline. I'm not saying an outline can't be a valuable tool, but once you get really good at vignettes and mirrors and foils, you can take a character on a journey even if you don't know where you're going, just by looking for similarities and differences from that initial image. In fact, almost always when writers run out of steam in their structure, it's because the problem is early in their script. They don't have a clear enough starting point, so it's hard for them to feel what needs to happen. Remember, your character, as much as you may think you know them here, it's not until they show up and they go, "Da-da, this is me," that you really know who they are. And it's not until you know who they are that you really know what you are building. You may think you know what you're building, but it's like trying to build a life with someone after reading their Match.com profile. Until you have that first date, you don't know what your journey's actually going to look like with them. And that doesn't mean the journey goes where you expect. That means the starting point is how you make meaning out of everything to come. So at the first level, you personally as the writer, coming up with a strong vignette or series of shots or strong series of lines from your character at the beginning that makes us go, "That is so them. I get where they're starting." If you're not doing that, that's like writing your script with your hands tied behind your back. So on the first level, on the writing level, vignettes are wildly important. On the second level is the audience level. The audience understands the story based on where the character begins and where the character ends. They tend to forget a lot of the plot in between. Ask your favorite friend what happens in The Godfather, and they're going to be like, "Oh, like Michael shows up and he doesn't want to be like his family, and at the end he kills everybody." And they're going to forget all the stuff that happens in between. We understand the beginnings and the ends, right? We actually tell ourselves the stories of our characters that way. We tell ourselves the stories of our lives that way, right? I'm not saying I was born on this day and I died on this day. I'm saying, and then I met her. And I thought it was going to be like this. And then all this stuff happened. And then this happened. And I finally made this choice, right? We actually understand our own lives through the beginnings and the ends. And in the same way, if we want our audience to understand a structure is just a way of talking about how a character changes or how a character fails to change. So if we want our audience to understand our structure and we don't give them a beginning, then nothing's going to mean anything to them. Now, remember, audiences and even producers rarely know how to talk about problems in structure. So they're not going to tell you, "Oh, well, I just didn't get it because I didn't have a clear image of where they're starting. I didn't know who and how they were. I didn't go, oh, that's so them." They're going to give you notes like this: "I just didn't care. I found them unlikable." And you're going to be confused because you care. You saved the cat, you saved a baby, and they still didn't like him. And you're like, "Well, they like Walter White. Why don't they like this nice guy?" The stakes felt low. And you're going to think that you need to blow more stuff up. But actually, the stakes felt low could literally just be, I didn't know where the character was starting. I didn't know who and how they were. I didn't know what they wanted. And therefore, I wasn't able to appreciate everything else that was unfolding in the script. So on the first level, as a writer, if you know where you start, everything becomes easier. On the second level, for the audience, if they know the character at the beginning, it's much easier for them to track the meaning of the end, to connect, to care, to feel structure, to feel stakes, to feel connected. The third level, though, is at the commercial level. We all want to sell our movies, right? Whether it's a tiny little indie or the biggest feature. And what gets movies made? Money. And unless we have incredibly deep pockets, in order to get that money, we need recognizable actors. I love Jesse Eisenberg. I love Kieran Culkin. Oh, I'm going to go see it, right? It's especially important when you're writing a little Sundance movie like A Real Pain that's not going to have a $100 million marketing budget. Oh, I want to go check that out. I loved him in Succession, right? I want to go check that out. I loved him in The Social Network. So the risk of our investors is mitigated by putting A-list actors, recognizable names, into movies, even in the smallest indie film. Now, here's the problem. The actors that you want, they are barraged with scripts, more scripts than they could ever read. And they are all looking for the diamond in the rough, right? Even super famous actors, right? Look at Sebastian Stan, who's a student of mine. He just got nominated for 2 Golden Globes, both for tiny little indie movies. A Different Man and The Apprentice, these are little films that got made because he lent his name to them. Why is he doing that? Because just like every actor, he wants to play great roles, right? He makes his money playing the Winter Soldier, but he wants to play those roles that really challenge him as an actor. And for that reason, you'll get to see him do scripts that aren't about the money. Well, that's a good thing for you to know, right? And it's not just him. A lot of actors are looking for that great role. But the problem is they're already barraged by scripts, and they're barraged by scripts by writers with stronger managers, stronger agents than you have. And that means your script, if you manage to get it to them, and sometimes you can, right? Because they're looking for those roles. If you've got the right role for them, sometimes you can get it to them. Or you can get it to their agent. Or you can get it to their production company, their director of development. But you've got to remember that they don't have time to watch the character slowly unfold. They got to know from that initial vignette, yes, I see myself in this movie. Or no, I don't. They need to go, that's me, or no, that's not me. I want to do that, or no, I don't want to do that. And by the way, it's okay if they go, whoa, that's not for me. Having a strong initial reaction to the vignette that's not me is great. Somebody hates that character. Somebody else is going to love them. Oh, they seem fine, or they seem normal, or I've seen that character before. That's a dangerous note. No great actors going like, I really would just love to play a familiar role, right? They want to play characters with specificity. And they don't have time to fully read every script. So you've got to hook them at the beginning. And so on a commercial level, really getting great at vignettes, really getting great at how you introduce characters allows you to draw in yourself, the audience, and the kind of A-list actor that's actually going to get your movie made. Okay, so now we understand why vignettes are important. Let's talk a little bit about the opening vignette we get in A Real Pain. The initial image that starts A Real Pain is Kieran Culkin sitting in the airport. He's got this giant backpack, and all these people are passing. Now, this is an important image because it's also going to be the image that ends the movie. Now, we don't fully know the value of it yet. Sometimes it takes a sequence for us to get the character. But the second image of the movie, when we meet David's character, suddenly pulls the Kieran Culkin character into focus. David is frantically calling Benji again and again and again. And in his constant phone calls, we are learning a couple of things. Number one, he is extremely anxious. Number two, he has very little faith in Benji because all of his calls are making the assumption, we know Benji's at the airport, but he thinks Benji's going to be late. He thinks Benji's probably not even on his way yet. So we know that he has very little faith in Benji. We know that he's running late. So we know that to some degree, he's projecting onto Benji the problem he's having in himself. We know that there's some compulsion to him. He keeps saying, I'm not going to call you again. And then he calls again. I'm not going to call you again. And then he calls again. We're starting to get focused. Even though we haven't seen Benji be irresponsible, we know that at least David perceives him as irresponsible. So we're telling ourselves he's at the airport early. He's either turning over a new leaf, or there are parts of him that we haven't seen. We know that David's perception of Benji are different than who Benji really is in the real world. And we know that there's already pressure between David's expectations of Benji and what Benji is physically doing in the scene. We also know who the hot relationship is. All of this movie is going to be built around the relationship between David and Benji and how it evolves. That gets fully set into motion when David finally arrives at the airport. And the first thing he says to Benji is, we better get you checked in. And Benji has this wonderful line. He's already checked in. But also, he talks about how they open the airport early and you can just hang out. You meet the craziest people at the airport, he says. And then he launches into this crazy story about this guy he met here who's an arms dealer, but who's kind of okay with being an arms dealer. Bang. We not only know who David is and what David's perception of Benji is, we know who Benji is. Benji is the kind of guy who shows up at the airport early because he likes to hang out there and meet people. Suddenly we have a story that connects to that first image that's so Benji, right? And that the Benji we're meeting is slightly different. We've seen a lot of wild characters. We've seen a lot of wild characters played by Kieran Culkin, right? But this is not Roman Roy. Even though he's still a loose cannon, we know we're meeting a guy who is so in the moment. And we know that we're pairing him with his cousin, who is so anxious, who is both running late himself and distrustful of Benji, who, by the way, has even shown up with a yogurt for David, right? And we can feel all that pressure from this opening sequence. This is where we are started. And of course, from there, Jesse Eisenberg, as the writer, is just going to do a bunch of mirrors, right? So even when they're going through security, Benji makes friends with the TSA person and knows all about her life, right? That everywhere Benji goes, he is fully in the emotion of the experience. And we know that everywhere David goes, he is in his own head, disconnected from the emotion of the experience. Now, I said this is a meditation on pain. And these characters have a shared pain. Their shared pain on the deepest level is the Holocaust. Their grandmother, through what's later described as 1,000 miracles, survived the concentration camps. And they're going back to Poland to do a heritage tour, to try to understand the Holocaust, to try to make some kind of peace with the Holocaust, with this shared family pain from 2 generations ago, right? So it's a meditation on that pain. On the next level, they're both dealing with the pain of their grandma's death. So grandma, who survived the Holocaust, has recently passed. And Benji, who experiences everything, is in tremendous pain about the loss of his grandmother, right? So the grandmother is the personal representation of the Holocaust, right? So you have this big historical thing, and it's boiled down to this one character who's been lost, right? Who was Benji's source of love and stability in his life. We will find out that Benji and David, they're going to do this tour with a group of people who are all older than them. And then on the last day, we know that they are going to peel off and they are going to go see where their grandma lived, right? And this is the moment of catharsis that they are both looking for, and we know it's going to have to be a doozy, right? Because in some way, it's going to have to outdo going to a concentration camp, taking them to grandma's. Because we know this is the pain that Benji has to move through, right? There's the familial, historical, inherited pain of the Holocaust, and then there is the personal pain of his grandmother's death. And I'm not giving anything away yet. We know this by the time we're 10 minutes into this movie, if we don't know it by watching the trailer. We also know that they've dealt with the loss of grandma much differently. David, of course, is grieved his grandmother. But grandmas die, right? It's a natural thing. He's moved on, and he seems to be living an effective life. He has a wife. He has a son. He has a good life, right? And things happen, and you move on because grandmas die, and it's part of life. In fact, he doesn't really want to be on this heritage trip. He is going because Benji needs him to go so badly. Because Benji just wants to be with him. Now, I'm going to get into some light spoilers. They're not going to be major, but they're going to be little things that I need to share so you can understand how the structure is built. So if you don't want to know anything, you can take a pause right now, or if you're okay learning a little bit more about how the structure of the movie unfolds, then you're going to get value out of what's to come, and I will let you know before I get to the big spoilers. So what happens over the course of this movie is we keep on getting vignette, 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 mirror, 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 that show us how great Benji is at connecting with everybody and how distanced David is, how much David is struggling to actually connect. In one of the most funny moments in the script, there is this sculpture of the Jews who fought back, and there are these giant metal soldiers. And Benji wants to take a picture with them. And David doesn't want to do it because it feels inappropriate. It feels wrong. And pretty soon, Benji not only has convinced David to take a picture of him, he's gotten the entire tour group to pose with him and reenact different roles. One's a medic, one's a soldier, right? The entire tour group is now a part of it. And David's taking all these pictures, and David is left out. And we're seeing this contrast between the way that Benji, who's so in the present and feels everything, is facilitating these relationships and making everyone around him feel great. And how David is becoming more and more and more uncomfortable by what he considers inappropriate actions. He doesn't understand why people connect to Benji. He's living within a little box that he makes for himself, where Benji seems to have access to the whole world. But as the story unfolds, the pressure starts to build, and we start to see another side of Benji, which, by the way, is also implied back with that initial vignette. We start to see the part of Benji that is unstable. We start to see the side of Benji that makes everything about him. We start to see the side of Benji that will ruin everybody else's time because of his emotional baggage, whether it's freaking out because they are in a first-class car on the train, and he thinks it's wrong as a Jew to be in the first class, to be treated like this when once they were herded on to these trains, right? He's still carrying that old pain, but he's acting hugely inappropriately. To actually blowing up at his tour guide as they're visiting this old cemetery in Poland, blowing up at the tour guide, telling him he's doing everything wrong, right? Lashing out in his pain at the person who's trying to help him experience the tour, making everybody uncomfortable and really pushing David to his limit. And that scene culminates with a very important moment where the tour guide backs down and basically lets Benji decide what's going to happen. And they end up placing pebbles on this old tomb, this tombstone, which is a Jewish tradition, which gets introduced here, which is another moment that is going to matter a lot later, right? So in the value of this scene, this is actually about Benji taking control in an inappropriate way, letting his pain affect everybody else and pushing David to the extreme, taking this ritual, which is supposed to be a ritual of honor and healing, and turning it upside down. Now, we're going to get to a slightly bigger spoiler here, not the worst. As we get deeper into the movie, we reach a point where Benji pushes David too far. And David is the one who now is going to reveal his pain in another really beautiful monologue. So Benji has stormed out of a dinner, and David is humiliated and embarrassed, and it's all just been too much. And David is talking to the other members of the tour group, and he's ashamed, and he's humiliated, and he's angry. And he says, yes, he's always been like this, up and down. Like he's sensitive, and he sees people so clearly. But then you say the wrong thing, and something switches. And you can see this monologue is actually just David processing what we've already witnessed structurally in the piece. One of the guests points out that Benji's obviously in a lot of pain. And David says, I know, but isn't everybody in pain in some way? Look where we came from. Look at what happened to our families. Who isn't wrought? Another tourist says, you seem okay. And David, who has been holding it together and acting appropriately the whole time, says, well, I'm not. That's the thing. I have shit going on. I do, but I take a pill for my fucking OCD. I jog. I meditate. I go to work and come home at the end of the day. I move forward because I know my pain is unexceptional. So I don't feel the need to burden everybody with it. Do you see where we've reached? We've reached the point where Benji has burdened everybody with his pain. Benji, who started such a delight, has burdened everyone with his pain. And where the guy who tries not to burden everybody with his pain is finally exploding and sharing. He continues, I'm sorry I'm ranting. I'm just so fucking exhausted by him sometimes. I love him and I hate him. And I want to kill him. And I want to be him. And I feel so lame around him because he's so fucking cool. And he doesn't give a shit. And then just being here with him is baffling. Because, like, how did this guy come from the survivors of this place? Now he's talking to the other members of the tour who have all shared their personal immigrant stories after how their family survived the Holocaust. He says that your uncle had to sell used furniture to rich assholes, or got rejected from med school, or that you survived the most horrific thing to happen on this planet in the last 30 years to the guy who survived the Rwandan genocide. That our grandmother survived when the whole world was trying to kill her. And I look at him and I just want to ask him. I just want to ask him, and I just can't. How could a person who's the product of 1,000 fucking miracles overdose on a bottle of sleeping pills? Do you see the beauty of this writing? How the personal Holocaust and the historical Holocaust, how grandma and all these other journeys are being pulled together thematically as yet another character shares the real pain that this person could take his own life. And we realize that David is still carrying that betrayal. He continues, like 6 months ago, my Aunt Leah, Benji's mom, found him on the couch. I probably shouldn't have said anything, and I know he looks so charming and funny to you, and you're all going to walk away with the impression of this amazing man. which he totally is in so many ways. But when I picture him, it's passed out on this ratty basement couch in New York City with my nice wife and adorable child, and it just fucking kills me. Now, this monologue is one of the most beautiful monologues in the piece. In fact, it's one of the most beautiful monologues you can find in a film. But why does it work? None of this would work if it weren't for that initial vignette. If it weren't for the pressure that we already felt, that we are curious about, between what we're seeing in Benji and the way David's reacting to it. None of this would matter if we hadn't seen all those mirrors where Benji just charms everybody and makes David feel like, I wish I could be you, and is so in the present. Or if we hadn't seen all those foils where Benji allows his pain to derail everybody around him, to ruin other people's time, right? If we hadn't seen all that pressure building between the two of them through this series of vignettes, starting from that very first image, none of this would land. And this is so important as you think about your own writing process, because often you send your script out to a contest or for coverage, right? And you get this feedback and people go, yeah, I didn't care. And you think the problem is that the monologue's not working. But actually the problem is the initial vignette isn't working. So we can't understand the monologue yet, right? And you're busy rewriting the monologue, taking the most beautiful thing in your script and making it worse and worse and worse. When the real problem is not in the monologue, but in the way that you got there. Thinking about that first image and how does every single image grow out of that. So at this point, we have now dealt with the personal holocaust for both of them. We have unearthed Benji's suicide attempt. We are starting to understand Benji's erratic behavior, and we're starting to finally make sense of the real dynamic between these two people who love each other, Benji and David. And we are finally understanding Benji's personal pain that he has been secretly carrying around, even though he feels like he's supposed to get over it. We are now going to deal in the next act with the Holocaust pain. We're going to send them to the concentration camps. We're going to force them to look at the historical pain that they are still carrying. But this movie really doesn't culminate until they leave the tour and go back to deal with Grandma. And they are both looking for the same thing. They are looking for catharsis. The same thing we are looking for as an audience, right? We want to go through that catharsis. We want to feel like they have come through their pain and they are at the other side, like they have changed, like they're going to live happily ever after or sadly ever after. And that is what we're building for. And we are wondering, how the hell is Jesse Eisenberg possibly going to outdo the friggin' concentration camp and this unbelievable monologue as he searches for catharsis? But see, this is a meditation on pain. And when you are meditating on a theme, you're looking for all the different variations. And not only is it a meditation on pain, it is a meditation on the pain that we still carry, that the world tells us we're supposed to be beyond by now. And we've seen a series of images that have all told us this, right? We have seen a visit to a town that was once the Jewish ghetto, which is now just a bunch of nondescript office buildings. We have seen the first-class ride on a train in Poland, right? Where it's just normal now for Jews to ride a train and be treated like valued guests, right? We have seen these images of the world moving on, and that is where that final culmination is going to grow from. Now, this is the big spoiler, so if you want to pause, now is your time. So they go all the way to Grandma's house, and what they find is that it's totally underwhelming. It doesn't give them the catharsis they're looking for. It's just a house. They're looking for a cathartic moment that's going to make sense of all this, of the historical Holocaust, of the personal Holocaust, of Grandma's death and Benji's suicide and their relationship. They're trying to make sense of all this pain that they are carrying that the world has moved on from. And so they decide, even though they're underwhelmed by the place, they decide that they are going to make their own ritual to make sense of it. which, by the way, is just going to be a foil of that image that we saw at the gravesite. So at the gravesite, they put pebbles on this grave of this person that nobody knew. But the value of that was Benji taking over with his own pain and ruining the experience for everybody else. Now at Grandma's house, they decide to leave 2 pebbles on her porch, on the porch of the house where she once lived before the Holocaust happened. And we are waiting for that moment of release, of catharsis, of tears. And they place the 2 pebbles on the porch. And up in the balcony from a nearby house, an old man starts yelling at them in Polish. And they don't speak Polish. They don't know what he's yelling about. But then he gets his son. And they explain their whole tragic story to him and why they are placing these pebbles. And the son basically goes, look, an old woman lives there now. Like, you can't place the pebbles there. She could trip. The message from this character on the balcony is the world's moved on, dude, right? They are denied this catharsis. And we are denied it. We, the audience, we want to cry at this moment. We want to feel like they've moved through their pain and it's all going to be better. But instead, the scene is played for comedy, and we are denied those tears. They are denied their catharsis, and they find themselves going home on a plane. And Benji doesn't have a plan. And David tries to break through to him. There's a story that Benji tells about Grandma slapping him and how much that changed his life. And David, who's held it all together and been totally appropriate, slaps his cousin, trying to bring him back. And Benji's like, what the hell are you doing? He's trying to reenact the gift that Grandma gave Benji, but Benji's like, I'm a grown man now. And David suspects that Benji has nowhere to go when Benji tells him he just wants to stay in the airport. And we suspect Benji has nowhere to go when Benji tells him he just wants to stay in the airport. But Benji insists, and this is just a mirror of that very first line, I like it here. You meet the craziest people in airports. And we're going to end this movie with David going home to his family and his old life. And Benji just sitting at the airport in that exact same shot where we first met him. And we'll see the title, A Real Pain, appear over him. And we realize that the title is a pun, because Benji is a real pain. And Benji is carrying a real pain. And the world has moved on from his real pain. And though these characters are seeking some kind of catharsis, what they've actually found may just be a giant circle. That on one hand, there may not be an answer to how do you move past your pain. Or the answer might be right there in front of us. The answer might be right there in Benji's character. A guy who can find joy just by being in the moment, even when he's just sitting, waiting at an airport. I hope that you enjoyed this podcast and it's helping your writing. If you're getting value out of the podcast, please write us a 5-star review, subscribe wherever you get your podcast, tell your friends, and if you're ready to take your writing to the next level, come study with me, writeyourscreenplay.com.